I'm Maya, 29 years old, and I'm sitting here surrounded by packed boxes holding my wedding photo from exactly 1 year ago. That perfect smile on my face makes me sick now because just 3 hours after this photo was taken, I found my new husband in the arms of someone I never suspected. But what happened next, what my brother Marcus did when he saw them together, that's what still keeps me awake at night. Before I tell you how my dream wedding became my worst nightmare, let me know where you're watching from, and please hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything about the people closest to you. The story really begins 3 years before that cursed wedding day. I met Daniel at my company's annual charity gala where I worked as a senior marketing coordinator. He was there representing his architecture firm bidding on the silent auction items with this confident smile that caught my attention from across the room. When he outbid everyone for a weekend getaway package and then donated it back to be auctioned again for more funds, I knew there was something special about him. We talked for hours that night, missing most of the formal program because we were so engrossed in conversation by the bar. He told me about his passion for sustainable design, how he wanted to create buildings that would last generations while respecting the environment. I shared my dreams of starting my own marketing consultancy one day, specializing in nonprofit organizations. By the end of the evening, we had exchanged numbers and made plans for coffee that weekend. Our first date turned into a 12-hour adventure. Coffee became lunch, became a walk through the city's art district, and before we knew it, we were having dinner at this tiny Italian place he knew about. The owner, an elderly woman named Rosa, treated Daniel like family, and by the end of the meal, she was calling me his beautiful girlfriend, even though we'd just met properly the day before. 6 months into dating, Daniel met my family at my dad's 60th birthday party. My brother Marcus immediately took to him like they'd been friends for years. They bonded over their shared love of baseball and craft beer, spending half the party debating statistics and planning to attend games together. Marcus's wife, Jennifer, seemed equally charmed, commenting on how Daniel was nothing like the commitment-phobic guys I usually dated. Jennifer and I had always had an interesting relationship. She married Marcus when I was 23, and while we got along well enough, there was always this slight distance between us. She came from money old Connecticut wealth, and sometimes her comments about my small apartment or my choice to shop at regular stores instead of boutiques stung a little. But she made my brother happy, and that was all that mattered to me. As Daniel and I grew closer, Jennifer inserted herself more into our relationship. She'd suggest double dates, plan weekend trips for the four of us, always ensuring we spent time together as couples. At first, I appreciated it because it meant Marcus and Daniel became genuine friends, not just men forced together because their partners were siblings. They started their own tradition of monthly golf games, while Jennifer and I would go to the spa. The proposal came on our 2-year anniversary. Daniel recreated our first date, starting with coffee at the same shop, but this time when we got to the art district, he'd arranged with a gallery owner to display photos from our relationship along the walls. The last photo was of him on one knee with the ring, and when I turned around there, he was in the same position. Of course, I said yes, crying so hard, I could barely get the word out. Wedding planning began immediately with Jennifer appointing herself as my unofficial coordinator. She had extensive experience, she said, from planning charity galas for her family's foundation. I was grateful for the help, especially since my mother had passed away when I was 18, and I felt lost without her guidance. Jennifer threw herself into the role with enthusiasm, creating spreadsheets, booking vendor meetings, and even negotiating discounts I never would have gotten on my own. We chose Rosewood Manor as our venue, a historic estate 40 minutes outside the city, with sprawling gardens and a ballroom that could accommodate our 200 guests. Daniel let me take the lead on most decisions, only asserting preferences on the music and food. He wanted a live band, not a DJ, and insisted on having stations representing different cuisines rather than a traditional plated dinner. Jennifer accompanied me to every dress fitting, every floral consultation, every cake tasting. Looking back, I should have noticed how her compliments always came with subtle criticisms. The dress was beautiful, but maybe too traditional. The flowers were elegant, but perhaps too simple. The cake flavor was delicious, but possibly too common. Each time I'd second-guess myself, and often ended up choosing what she subtly suggested instead. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed to appreciate Jennifer's involvement. He'd thank her profusely for helping me, saying how much easier she was making everything for both of us. When she suggested they meet separately to plan a surprise for me during the reception, I thought it was sweet. They'd text about it, and he'd quickly put his phone away when I entered the room, claiming he didn't want to ruin the surprise. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were planned for the same weekend, with the guys going to Vegas while we had a spa weekend in wine country. But Daniel came down with food poisoning the day before, so Marcus went without him. Jennifer also had to cancel last minute, claiming a work emergency with her family's foundation. I was disappointed but understood, and my college friends rallied to make it an amazing weekend anyway. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found Jennifer crying in my apartment bathroom during a planning session. When I asked what was wrong, she said she and Marcus were having some issues. Nothing serious, just stress from work affecting their relationship. I hugged her, assured her everything would work out, and she thanked me for being such a good sister. The moment felt genuine, and for the first time I thought we might become truly close. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect October weather. The trees around Rosewood Manor were painted in brilliant reds and golds, and the sun shone without a cloud in the sky. I woke up in the bridal suite surrounded by my 3 bridesmaids, including my best friend Rachel, who'd flown in from Seattle. We ordered room service and champagne, beginning the transformation that would turn me into a bride. Jennifer arrived late, looking flustered and apologizing about traffic. Her hair and makeup team were waiting, and she quickly got ready while coordinating with vendors on her phone. She seemed off, dropping her phone twice and spilling orange juice on her robe, but I attributed it to coordinator stress. She was taking her unofficial role seriously, wanting everything to be perfect for me. My father arrived to see me before the ceremony, tears in his eyes, as he fastened my mother's pearl necklace around my neck. She'd worn it at her own wedding, and we'd always planned I'd wear it at mine. He told me how proud she would be, how I'd found a good man who would take care of me. The moment was everything I'd dreamed of since losing her. Daniel texted me throughout the morning, little love notes about how he couldn't wait to marry me, how beautiful the venue looked, how his groomsmen were keeping him calm. Each message made my heart flutter with anticipation. Marcus sent a photo of the 2 of them, Daniel adjusting his bow tie while my brother gave a thumbs up in the background. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon, timed perfectly for the golden hour photographs afterward. As my bridesmaids lined up, Jennifer kept checking her phone, muttering about some issue with the catering. She actually stepped out of line at one point, returning just as the music changed for her entrance as maid of honor. She walked down the aisle with a fixed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When the wedding march began and the doors opened for my entrance, I saw Daniel at the altar wiping tears from his eyes. Marcus stood beside him as best man, beaming with pride. The walk down that aisle felt both eternal and instant, my father's steady arm, the only thing keeping me grounded. Every face I passed was filled with joy. Friends and family who'd traveled from across the country to witness this moment. Daniel's vows were perfection, promising to support my dreams, to build a life of adventure and stability together, to love me through every season of our lives. He spoke about how I'd changed him, made him want to be better, to deserve the love I gave so freely. There wasn't a dry eye in the venue, including mine. My vows spoke of finding home in a person, of choosing him every day for the rest of our lives, of the family we'd create together. Marcus's reading from Corinthians about love being patient and kind held special meaning, as he spoke about watching both his sister and best friend find their perfect match in each other. He joked about gaining a brother instead of losing a sister, about how their golf games would now be family events. The crowd laughed warmly, and I caught Jennifer dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. When Jennifer stood for her speech, she kept it surprisingly brief. She welcomed Daniel to the family, said we made a beautiful couple, and wished us happiness. It felt generic, especially compared to the heartfelt words from everyone else, but I was too happy to dwell on it. She handed me my bouquet with shaking hands, which I thought was just emotion from the ceremony. The kiss, after being pronounced husband and wife, was magical, Daniel dipping me slightly as our guests erupted in celebration. Rose petals fell from the ceiling, a surprise he'd arranged that made me laugh with delight. Walking back down the aisle as Mrs. Patterson, I felt complete whole in a way I hadn't known I was missing. Everything was perfect. The cocktail hour was held in the Manor's garden with a string quartet playing as guests mingled. Daniel and I made our rounds accepting congratulations and sharing hugs with everyone. My college roommate told embarrassing stories about my dating life before Daniel making him laugh and kiss my temple affectionately. His colleagues from the firm talked about how he'd been useless at work all week, too excited about the wedding to focus on blueprints. Daniel's Aunt Martha, a woman I'd only met twice before, pulled me aside with an odd intensity. She held my hands tightly and said to keep him close, that Patterson men needed strong women to keep them grounded. Before I could ask what she meant, she was swept away by another relative, leaving me puzzled but not concerned enough to follow up. The photographer gathered us for the formal photos in the garden, the setting sun creating a golden backdrop. Jennifer was missing for the first few shots, finally appearing with an excuse about fixing a problem with the place cards. She stood next to me in the photos, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that would be visible in every picture from that session. During one break between photos, Daniel disappeared, saying something about helping with technical issues in the ballroom. Marcus went to find him after 15 minutes, returning with him just as the photographer called for the final family portraits. Daniel's hair was slightly mussed, which Marcus teased him about, saying marriage was already making him let himself go. My grandmother. My mother's mother, who'd flown in from Florida despite her age, presented me with a family heirloom bracelet that had been in our family for 4 generations. As she clasped it around my wrist, she whispered that my mother was watching and was so proud. The moment broke through my composure, and I sobbed in her arms while the photographer discreetly captured the raw emotion. The reception entrance was announced with fanfare, the band playing our requested song as we danced our way into the ballroom. The space had been transformed into an autumn wonderland with trees made of lights and leaves seemingly floating from the ceiling. Jennifer had outdone herself with the decorations, even I had to admit. Everything was more beautiful than I'd imagined. Our first dance was to At Last by Etta James, a song that held special meaning since it had been playing during our first kiss. Daniel held me close, whispering in my ear about how beautiful I looked, how he couldn't believe I was his wife, how he wanted to skip the reception and start our honeymoon immediately. I laughed, reminding him we had 200 guests to entertain first. My father-daughter dance was to a song my mother had loved, and there wasn't a dry eye as my dad told me stories about their wedding day, how he saw so much of her in me. He said she would have adored Daniel, would have welcomed him as the son she never had. The dance ended with Marcus cutting in, spinning me around and making me laugh through my tears. As dinner service began, I noticed Jennifer wasn't at the head table. Her seat beside Marcus sat empty, her napkin still perfectly folded. When I asked my brother, he said she was probably handling some vendor crisis, that she'd been stressed all day about making everything perfect. He didn't seem concerned, so I tried not to be either, but something nagged at me. 20 minutes into dinner, she still hadn't appeared. The catering was running smoothly. The band was perfect. Everything was under control, so where was she? I excused myself, saying I needed to touch up my lipstick, and went to find my sister-in-law. I checked the bathroom first, then the bridal suite, where we'd gotten ready, but both were empty. The search for Jennifer started casually, but as minutes passed, my concern grew. I asked several guests if they'd seen her, but everyone was focused on dinner and conversation. The catering staff hadn't seen her in at least 30 minutes. Her phone went straight to voicemail when I called, which was unlike her since she'd been glued to it all day. I found Marcus between courses and pulled him aside, trying not to alarm him. He hadn't seen Jennifer either, but didn't seem worried, assuming she was somewhere handling details. But when I told him about the unanswered phone, his expression shifted. We decided to search separately to cover more ground, agreeing to meet back in 10 minutes. The venue had multiple spaces beyond the main ballroom and garden. I checked the library. The conservatory, even stepped outside to see if she was getting air on one of the terraces. Each empty room increased my anxiety. This was so unlike Jennifer, especially during an event she'd worked so hard to perfect. Something was wrong. Heading up the main staircase to the second floor, I remembered the venue coordinator mentioning private rooms that could be used for smaller gatherings. Maybe Jennifer had found some issue up there, though. I couldn't imagine what. The hallway was dimly lit. Most lights turned off since this area wasn't being used for the reception. As I walked down the corridor checking doors, I heard something that made me pause. It was laughter, definitely Jennifer's distinctive laugh coming from behind a door marked Victorian Room. Relief flooded through me as I reached for the handle, ready to tease her about disappearing during dinner. The door wasn't locked, and I pushed it open with a smile that died instantly on my lips. The scene before me took several seconds to process, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Jennifer was pressed against the wall, her burgundy bridesmaid dress pulled down to her waist, and the man kissing her neck, his hands in her hair, was wearing a tuxedo. My tuxedo, Daniel's tuxedo, my husband's tuxedo. Because it was Daniel, my husband of 3 hours, wrapped around my sister-in-law. They didn't notice me at first, too lost in each other to hear the door open. It was like watching a movie, something happening to someone else. Not to me, not on my wedding day. Jennifer's hands were running through Daniel's hair, the same hair I'd run my fingers through during our first dance. His wedding ring, the one I'd placed on his finger today, caught the light as he moved his hand to her face. The sound that escaped me wasn't quite a scream, more like a wounded animal's cry. Both their heads snapped toward me, eyes widening in horror. Jennifer immediately pulled up her dress, while Daniel stepped back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, before Jennifer whispered my name. My legs gave out, and I slid down the doorframe to the floor, my wedding dress pooling around me like spilled milk. Daniel started toward me, his hand extended, but I scrambled backward, my back hitting the hallway wall. He was saying something, words tumbling out of his mouth, but all I could hear was the rushing in my ears, the sound of my world collapsing. Jennifer was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. She kept saying it wasn't what it looked like, that they could explain, that it just happened. Just happened. Like falling into someone's arms on my wedding day was an accident, a mishap, and oops. The absurdity of it made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that scared even me. Daniel knelt in front of me, trying to take my hands, but I slapped him away with strength I didn't know I had. His face was flushed, his bow tie undone, lipstick that wasn't mine on his collar. The man who'd just vowed to forsake all others, who'd cried as I walked down the aisle, who'd whispered loving words during our first dance. All lies. The fragments started clicking together in my shocked mind. The late-night work meetings between them to plan my surprise. Jennifer's nervousness all day. Daniel's disappearance during photos. Her absence during dinner. How long had this been going on? How many times had they been together while I sat ignorantly planning our future? Jennifer tried to approach, but I held up my hand, finally finding my voice to tell her to stay away from me. She was my brother's wife. My brother, who trusted her, who loved her, who was downstairs right now, probably wondering where we all were. The betrayal wasn't just mine. It was his, too. We were both victims of their deception. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made us all freeze. Marcus appeared at the end of the hallway, his face shifting from concern to confusion as he took in the scene. Me on the floor in my wedding dress, Jennifer with her ruined makeup and partially fixed dress. Daniel kneeling between us with guilt written across every feature. The equation was simple, even if the reality was impossible. Marcus's expression transformed in slow motion from confusion to understanding to rage. He crossed the hallway in 3 strides, grabbing Daniel by his lapels and slamming him against the wall. The sound echoed through the corridor as Daniel's head hit the wallpaper. Jennifer screamed, reaching for Marcus, but he shoved her away without even looking at her. Marcus held Daniel against the wall, his face inches from my husband's, and the words that came out were low and deadly. He asked Daniel, how long, how many times, how dare he? Daniel tried to push back, but Marcus had 6 inches and 40 pounds on him, plus the advantage of rage fueling his strength. Jennifer kept pulling at Marcus's arm, begging him to stop to let her explain. That's when she said the words that changed everything. Through her tears, she admitted this wasn't the first time that it had been going on for months. The confession hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating everything it touched. Marcus released Daniel so suddenly that he stumbled. Then my brother turned to his wife with a look I'd never seen on his face before. Marcus laughed, but it was hollow frightening. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with shaking hands before holding it up for all of us to see. There were photos, grainy but unmistakable. Daniel and Jennifer entering a hotel together. Another of them kissing in a car. More of them at a restaurant I recognized as being near Daniel's office. Timestamps going back 6 months. My brother had known. He'd suspected enough to hire a private investigator to gather proof, but he'd said nothing. When I found my voice to ask why, his answer broke me all over again. He'd hoped he was wrong, wanted to believe it was just paranoid thinking. He'd planned to confront Jennifer after the wedding, not wanting to ruin my day with suspicions. He'd been protecting me while dying inside. Daniel tried to speak to offer some explanation, but Marcus's fist connected with his jaw before he could get the words out. The crack echoed through the hallway, and Daniel went down, blood immediately flowing from his split lip. Jennifer screamed again, dropping beside Daniel to check on him, and that small action, choosing him over her husband, told us everything. Security appeared 2 large men in black suits who must have heard the commotion. They looked between us, unsure how to handle a fight involving the wedding party. Marcus identified himself as the best man, surprisingly calm now, and asked them to escort Mr. Patterson out of the building. When they hesitated, he added that the groom had been caught with another woman and was no longer welcome. By now, guests had started gathering in the hallway, drawn by the screams and commotion. My bridesmaids pushed through Rachel, immediately dropping beside me, wrapping her arms around my shaking form. My father appeared, took one look at the scene, and his face went purple with rage. He had to be physically held back from attacking Daniel himself. Jennifer tried to approach Marcus one more time, but he looked through her like she was glass. He told her to get out, that her things would be packed and sent to her parents' house, that any communication would go through lawyers. She sobbed, saying they could work through this, that she loved him, but he just turned his back on her completely. The venue coordinator, an elderly woman who'd probably seen everything in her 40 years in the business, took charge with quiet efficiency. She ushered the gathered guests back downstairs, instructed security to remove both Daniel and Jennifer from the property, and asked if I needed medical attention. The pragmatic questions helped ground me in reality. Rachel and my other bridesmaids formed a protective circle, helping me to my feet. My legs felt like jelly, and my beautiful dress was wrinkled and stained from the floor. The tiara my grandmother had lent me was crooked, probably broken. I looked like exactly what I was, a bride whose wedding had just imploded in the most spectacular way possible. Marcus knelt in front of me, taking my hands gently. His knuckles were bloody from punching Daniel, and his eyes were red with unshed tears. We just stared at each other, 2 siblings whose lives had just been destroyed by the people we trusted most. He apologized over and over for not telling me about his suspicions, for letting me walk into this nightmare. The impossible question loomed before us. What do we tell 200 guests waiting downstairs? The band was probably wondering why the cake cutting was delayed. The photographer was missing the golden hour shots. Our elderly relatives were expecting to see us happy, celebrating in love. Instead, 2 marriages had just ended before one of them really began. Rachel took charge, bless her. She suggested we go to the bridal suite, while she and Marcus figured out what to tell everyone. My father wanted to make an announcement himself, something that would probably involve calling Daniel names that would shock my conservative relatives, but Marcus convinced him to let it be handled delicately. In the bridal suite, I sat in front of the mirror, still in my wedding dress, looking at a reflection I didn't recognize. The happy bride from this morning was gone, replaced by someone hollow-eyed and broken. My makeup artist had done such beautiful work, waterproof everything so tears of joy wouldn't ruin it. She hadn't considered tears of devastation. Marcus returned after 20 minutes, looking older than his 33 years. He and the DJ had made a simple announcement that due to a family emergency, the reception would need to end early. They thanked everyone for coming, apologized for the inconvenience, and asked for privacy during this difficult time. Most guests left confused but respectful. Some probably suspected the truth. My phone had been blowing up with messages, but I couldn't look at them. Daniel's parents had apparently confronted him in the parking lot, his mother slapping him before they drove away in shame. Jennifer's parents hadn't even been at the wedding, claiming a prior commitment, and now I wondered if they'd known something. The gossip would spread through our social circles like wildfire. The logistics of untangling a wedding that had barely begun were surreal. Rachel coordinated with the venue to box up the untouched cake, the one with the little bride and groom on top, that now seemed like a mockery. The gifts were loaded into Marcus's SUV to be dealt with later, each wrapped box representing someone's faith in a marriage that lasted 3 hours. Back at my apartment, still in my wedding dress, because I couldn't bear to take it off alone, I sat with Marcus on my couch. Neither of us spoke for the longest time, just sat there processing the destruction of our lives. Finally, he told me the whole story of his suspicions, how Jennifer had become secretive with her phone, how she'd started working late more often. He'd noticed charges on their credit card for hotels during times she was supposedly at her parents' house. When he'd confronted her about it, she'd said she needed space to think about their marriage, that they were having issues. He'd believed her, even suggested counseling, trying to save what he thought was a struggling relationship. Meanwhile, she was with my fiancé. The private investigator had been a last resort, hired just 3 weeks ago when Jennifer had supposedly gone to a work conference that he discovered didn't exist. The photos started coming in within days. Marcus had been planning to confront her after my honeymoon, not wanting to destroy my happiness with unproven suspicions. He'd carried this burden to protect me. Daniel had texted me 37 times and called 23 times. I didn't read or listen to any of it. Jennifer had sent a long email that Marcus read out loud, where she tried to explain how it started. Apparently, Daniel had been helping her with her gambling problem, something Marcus didn't even know existed. She'd been in debt from online poker, and Daniel had lent her money without telling me. Their secret meetings about the debt had turned into emotional support sessions, then attraction, then the affair. She claimed they'd tried to stop multiple times, that they never meant to hurt us, that the wedding made them realize they needed to end it. But they couldn't help themselves one last time. The email was full of excuses, each one more pathetic than the last. Marcus threw his phone across the room after reading it, the screen shattering against my wall. The gambling debt was over $40,000. Daniel had been paying it off gradually, money I thought was going to our wedding and honeymoon. Every fancy vendor Jennifer had suggested, every upgrade she'd pushed my fiancé, was funding his affair through our wedding budget. My father arrived with Chinese takeout, the same comfort food he'd brought when Mom died, when I'd failed my first graduate school application, when my first serious boyfriend had cheated. He didn't try to make it better with words, just sat with us, making sure we ate something. The normalcy of eating lo mein in a wedding dress worth thousands was absurdly comforting. Rachel had taken over my phone, fielding calls and messages from concerned friends and relatives. She gave vague responses about a personal crisis, promising I'd reach out when ready. My boss had already emailed saying to take all the time I needed. The news had traveled fast through our interconnected professional circles. That first night, Marcus slept on my couch, neither of us wanting to be alone. I could hear him crying quietly when he thought I was asleep, and I'm sure he heard me doing the same. 2 siblings in their late 20s and early 30s, successful professionals with planned-out lives, reduced to broken people by the ones we'd chosen to love. The next morning brought practical considerations. The honeymoon to Bali was non-refundable but transferable. Marcus insisted I should still go, that getting away would help, but the thought of sitting on a beach where I was supposed to be with my husband made me physically ill. We compromised that I'd decide later, keeping the option open. Marcus met with a divorce attorney that afternoon while I researched annulment law. Since the marriage hadn't been consummated and involved fraud, I qualified for annulment rather than divorce. The legal distinction mattered to me. I didn't want to be a divorcee at 29. I wanted it to be like the marriage never existed, which in a way it hadn't. The wedding photographer called awkwardly asking if I still wanted the photos. I told her to delete everything except the getting ready shots with my bridesmaids and the photos with my parents and grandmother. She mentioned she'd captured some beautiful moments between me and Marcus' siblings supporting each other, and those I asked her to save. Social media became a minefield. Friends who hadn't been at the wedding were posting congratulations on my wall, sharing the engagement photos from earlier in the year. Rachel took over my accounts, removing tags, deleting posts, essentially erasing the digital footprint of a relationship that had been a lie. Each deletion felt like a small victory. Daniel showed up at my apartment on day 3, but Marcus had anticipated this and was there waiting. The confrontation was brief. Marcus told him that any communication needed to go through lawyers, that if he came near me again, we'd file for a restraining order. Daniel tried to plead his case, but Marcus just closed the door in his face. Jennifer had been bombarding both of us with messages from her parents' house. Her family was mortified her father had apparently cut her off financially, and she was desperate to save either her marriage or her relationship with Daniel. The fact that she couldn't decide which she wanted more told us everything about her character. 2 weeks after the wedding, I finally listened to one of Daniel's voicemails. His voice was broken, slurred, like he'd been drinking. He talked about how Jennifer had pursued him, how he'd tried to resist, how he never meant for it to happen. He loved me. He insisted Jennifer meant nothing. The mental gymnastics required to justify destroying 2 marriages for something meaningless was astounding. Marcus had moved into a corporate apartment, unable to stay in the house he'd shared with Jennifer. He'd discovered more about her secret life, including maxed-out credit cards. He didn't know existed a storage unit full of shopping purchases and a second phone she'd used for her gambling and affair. The woman he'd married had been a complete fiction. We started having dinner together every night, sometimes at my place, sometimes at his temporary apartment. We cooked meals our mother had taught us, comfort food from childhood that reminded us of simpler times when betrayal meant someone taking your toy, not destroying your future. These dinners became our therapy, our safe space to rage and cry and slowly heal. My friends rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Women I hadn't spoken to since college reached out with their own stories of betrayal and survival. My book club turned into an informal support group. Even acquaintances from the gym offered solidarity. The sisterhood of women who'd been wronged by men was sadly vast but incredibly supportive. 3 weeks in the universe delivered poetic justice. Jennifer called Marcus crying, saying Daniel had ended things with her. Once the excitement of the affair was gone, replaced with the reality of their actions, he'd realized she wasn't what he wanted. He'd been trying to get me back, and she was in the way. She actually wanted sympathy from the man she'd betrayed. Marcus hung up on her mid-sentence, but the information was satisfying. They'd destroyed everything for a relationship that couldn't survive 3 weeks in the real world. The forbidden excitement had been the glue, and without it they were just 2 selfish people who'd hurt everyone around them for nothing. A month after the wedding, Marcus made a major decision. His company had been offering him a transfer to their Denver office for years, and he'd always declined because Jennifer loved Boston. Now, with nothing keeping him here, he accepted. A fresh start in a new city, where nobody knew his story, where he could heal without constant reminders. The news hit me hard initially. My brother had been my rock through this nightmare, and losing him felt like another abandonment. But I understood his need to escape, to rebuild somewhere fresh. We promised weekly video calls and visits every few months. Our trauma had bonded us in a way that distance couldn't break. I decided to use the Bali tickets after all, but I went alone. 2 weeks on a tropical island with nothing but books, yoga, and strangers who didn't know my story. The first few days were brutal, seeing honeymoon couples everywhere, but slowly I found peace in solitude. I learned to eat alone at nice restaurants, to explore without waiting for someone else's schedule. On the beach one evening, I met an older woman named Patricia, who was traveling solo after her divorce at 60. She told me about rebuilding her life, finding herself after 40 years of marriage. She said something that stuck with me. The end of a relationship isn't a failure if you learned something. The failure is staying in something that destroys you. I started journaling, filling notebook after notebook with thoughts I couldn't say out loud. About the red flags I'd ignored, the way Jennifer had always touched Daniel's arm when she laughed, how he'd been so eager to help with her problems. The signs had been there, but love had made me blind. Or maybe I'd just trusted the wrong people. Marcus sent photos from Denver, his new apartment with mountain views, the hiking trails he'd discovered, the craft brewery where he'd made friends. He looked lighter somehow, the constant tension he'd carried throughout his marriage finally released. He was in therapy, he told me, working through not just the betrayal, but why he'd ignored his instincts for so long. Returning home from Bali, I felt different. Not healed, that would take much longer, but stable. I threw myself into work, taking on projects I'd been too scared to pursue before. My boss noticed, promoting me to director of marketing within 2 months. The raise meant I could afford a better apartment, one without memories of Daniel. The legal proceedings moved forward quietly. Both the annulment and Marcus's divorce were uncontested. Jennifer had no grounds to fight for alimony given her affair, and Daniel didn't dare try to claim any of my assets. By spring, 6 months after the October wedding, we were both legally free from our disasters of marriages. The real healing began after the legal endings were official. I started therapy too, unpacking not just the betrayal, but my patterns in relationships. Why I'd been so quick to trust, so eager to ignore red flags, so willing to let others guide my decisions. My therapist helped me see that my mother's death had left me searching for family, for belonging, making me vulnerable to people who seemed to offer that security. Marcus visited for my 30th birthday, bringing friends from Denver who happened to be in town. We had a party at my new apartment, the one with exposed brick and huge windows that Daniel would have hated. I made it through the entire night without mentioning the wedding, once a personal victory that felt monumental. Through the grapevine, we heard about Daniel and Jennifer's continued saga. They'd tried to reunite after he'd initially rejected her, but the foundation of lies made trust impossible. She accused him of still loving me. He accused her of using him for money. They broke up and got back together 3 times in 4 months, a toxic cycle that surprised no one. I joined a hiking group, something Daniel had always mocked as unnecessary, when we could just walk in the city. Every weekend we'd explore trails around New England, and I discovered a love for mountains and forests I'd never known existed. The group was full of people starting over, divorced folks, widows, people learning to be alone. We called ourselves the Phoenix Club, rising from ashes. At work, I launched a campaign for a nonprofit supporting women leaving abusive relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the work felt meaningful. Using my pain to help others transform theirs into power became therapeutic. The campaign won 3 industry awards, and my CEO asked me to speak at conferences about purpose-driven marketing. Marcus found love again, first meeting a fellow hiker named Claire, who knew his story and didn't care. She was a park ranger, divorced herself with a teenage daughter. Watching my brother slowly trust again, seeing him smile genuinely for the first time in a year, gave me hope that recovery was possible, that betrayal didn't have to be the end of our stories. A year after the wedding, on what would have been our anniversary, I burned the wedding dress in a ceremony my therapist suggested. My friends gathered in my backyard, each bringing something from their own past to release. We made a bonfire of old pain, roasting marshmallows over the ashes of dreams that no longer served us. It was cathartic and slightly insane, perfect for the situation. Daniel sent one last letter, arriving the day after the burning ceremony. 3 pages of apologies, explanations, and requests for forgiveness. He was in therapy too, he said, dealing with commitment issues stemming from his parents' marriage. He took responsibility while also subtly blaming everyone else. I read it once, then added it to my compost bin, letting his words decompose into something useful. Marcus and I started new traditions to replace the ones we'd lost. Monthly video dinners where we cooked the same recipe in different states. Annual sibling trips to places neither of us had been. We went to Iceland to see the Northern Lights, Japan during cherry blossom season, Peru to hike Machu Picchu. Each trip was a celebration of surviving and choosing to thrive. My grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep 18 months after the wedding. At her funeral, She left me a letter saying she was proud of how I'd handled the disaster with grace. She'd never liked Daniel. She admitted finding him too smooth, too perfect. She'd kept quiet, not wanting to interfere, but she was glad I'd escaped before children complicated things. 2 years after the wedding, I met someone new at a conference. He was a journalist covering the event, recently relocated from Chicago. We bonded over coffee and conversation about authentic storytelling and marketing versus journalism. He asked for my number, and for the first time in 2 years, I gave it without hesitation or fear. Taking things slowly, we dated for 6 months before becoming exclusive. He knew my story, had Googled me, and found the social media remnants of my previous life. Instead of running, he asked thoughtful questions and shared his own relationship failures. His honesty and emotional availability were refreshing after Daniel's calculated perfection. Marcus married Claire in a tiny ceremony in Rocky Mountain National Park with just immediate family. I stood as his witness, crying happy tears as he promised to love someone again, despite knowing how much love could hurt. Claire's daughter called him Dad for the first time that day, and even the officiant got emotional at the beauty of second chances. The irony of life is that my disaster of a wedding became the best thing that happened to both Marcus and me. Without that traumatic day, he'd still be trapped in a marriage built on lies, slowly drowning in Jennifer's deceptions. I'd be married to a man capable of betraying me at my happiest moment, probably with children by now, tied forever to someone who didn't deserve that connection. Standing in my apartment now, 3 years after that October day, I can honestly say I'm grateful. Not for the pain that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but for the revelation. Marcus and I discovered what we were made of, found strength we didn't know existed, and built lives authentic to who we really are, not who we thought we should be. The wedding photo I kept, the one of Marcus and me laughing during the reception, before everything imploded, sits on my bookshelf. It reminds me that even in moments before disaster, love exists. Real love between siblings who would stand by each other through anything. That's the love that survived the chaos, the love that grew stronger through shared pain. Marcus often says that Jennifer and Daniel did us a favor by revealing themselves when they did. Imagine if we'd discovered their affair years later, after mortgages and pregnancies and deeper entanglements. The wedding disaster was a gift wrapped in barbed wire, painful to unwrap, but valuable once revealed. I never did find out what the surprise was that Daniel and Jennifer had been planning for the reception. Part of me wonders if it was ever real or just an excuse to spend time together. It doesn't matter now. The only surprise that mattered was discovering who they really were, and that surprise, though devastating, set us free. Sometimes I run into mutual friends who update me on their lives. Jennifer moved to California, still gambling, still making destructive choices. Daniel married someone else quickly, a woman who looks disturbingly like me, and they divorced within 18 months. They're both still searching for something external to fill internal voids, not understanding that happiness comes from integrity, not intensity. My story isn't unique, sadly. Betrayal happens every day at weddings, anniversaries, random Tuesdays. What matters is how we rise from it, how we refuse to let someone else's choices define our worth. Marcus and I chose to see our disaster wedding as a beginning, not an ending. The beginning of authentic lives, honest relationships, and the knowledge that we can survive anything. If you're watching this because you've experienced something similar, know that the pain does fade. The humiliation transforms into strength. The anger becomes fuel for building something better. And sometimes, just sometimes, the worst day of your life becomes the one you're most grateful for because it freed you from a future that would have slowly destroyed your soul. Trust again and trust differently. Love again, but love wiser. And always remember that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. I got my truth revealed in the most dramatic way possible, but it was still truth, and truth, no matter how it arrives, is always a gift. Thank you for listening to my story. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever discovered a betrayal that turned out to be a blessing? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. And remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that surviving betrayal is possible. sending love and strength to everyone rebuilding after someone else's destruction.